and just keep everyone's we just want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I will just get into it. But yeah, good morning everybody. Thank you again for joining us for this regenerative agriculture workshop. um yeah, go ahead and move to the next slide, Daisy. Thank you. So these are our presenters for today. Hello, everyone. I'm Tiana Suazo. Sorry for not sharing my camera, but I am on limited Wi-Fi. Think y'all know how that goes, but that's how I look there on the left. Then we'll have Chasity joining us, which I'm not sure if she's on the chat. And then, of course, Daisy. Next slide. Well, and this is just some of our tags, some of our info where you can follow us just to learn more about the Center of Southwest Cultures. We got our YouTube there, our Insta, our Facebook, and of course our email. So if you have any questions beyond this or just want to interact with us more, feel free to reach out on any one of those platforms. All right, next slide.
Before I go to the next slide, I'll just jump in and share that the recording from today's Zoom will also be available on YouTube down the line. So if there's information you don't get super clearly today or you want to circle back and revisit, that will be available to you. Okay, back to you, Tiana.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we're good to go to the next one. Okay, all right, everyone. So this is just an overview of what we're going to be going over today in the presentation. We're going to be talking a little bit about what regenerative agriculture is, some of the benefits of regenerative agriculture. Then we'll jump into a little Q&A, then some soil health principles, followed by another Q&A, and then a closing. All right, next one. So, the main thing we're here to learn about today, regenerative agriculture. So, I have like a textbook definition of it, which is basically a holistic farming approach that focuses on restoring and enhancing soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem function, aiming to improve long-term sustainability and resilience. So for a lot of us, I think those like are as grassroots farmers, um, it's just sort of like to me, being from like Taos Pueblo and Jemez Pueblo, it's just like farming that we've kind of been doing for time immemorial. And that's like considering, the land, the water, the animals, the insects, the soil, everything around our farm. Anything you like to add, Daisy?
I really appreciate what Tiana just said. And I think that regenerative agriculture is kind of like the word regenerative agriculture is kind of a new term. But it's really just describing in so many ways traditional agriculture. And I think that this term has come to the surface as a response to the conventional agriculture that was introduced kind of along with the Industrial Revolution. So I just want to reiterate, yeah, like regenerative agriculture is actually like really old technologies that are just coming back to us now because we really need them. I also just wanted to name that Chasity is with us now, our other presenters. So if Chasity has anything to share, I will mostly just be running tech and answering questions in the chat. And Tiana and Chasity are going to teach us all about regenerative ag.
Awesome. Welcome, Chastity.
Thank you all. Sorry that I'm late. Yeah, I'll just add that regenerative agriculture to me is, like Tiana said, what I feel like the practices of indigenous people have been doing when it comes to taking care of their land. There's this whole notion around stewardship. So seeing that, when we are working the land, we see ourselves as stewards of the land, of the water and the seeds. And I think that idea or that approach to farming and agriculture is how I was taught to look at it as. And so, yeah, I think it's a little bit difficult to like understand some of these terms that were coined, like Daisy said, after, big agriculture was introduced, because there are a lot of the practices that we know. And when I think of regenerative agriculture, I think of like, how folks are trying to understand healthy soil, thinking about how we treat the land and the soil and our crop and the seeds, and their health, like thinking about how they will be thriving not only in the year to come or the season to come, but also many years in the future. And just thinking about the overall health of the land and the animals and the seeds and the water, for future generations. And so, yeah, that's what comes to mind when I think of regenerative agriculture. And yeah, that's what I'll share.
Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Chastity. All right, we can move on to the next slide. Oh my gosh. And now the benefits of regenerative agriculture. So with regenerative agriculture, like were saying all in our own ways earlier, it's just how like all of the things we are listing from soil health, biodiversity, our water, our crops, the weather, are all really gonna like how they work together. So the following slides will go over all of the soil health, biodiversity, improved water quality, higher crop yields, and how regenerative agriculture helps mitigate climate change. So part of regenerative ag, and sorry, like it's just like such a big word in a way. And also just like a new word that I've sort of been annoyed with for a while. And I'm sorry if I'm going back to like their meaning of regenerative agriculture, but for a long time of working in a nonprofit that focused on like just agriculture in general and like youth education, regenerative ag to me was just like such a buzzword term. So if I struggle with saying the word, please give me some grace. Um, but when thinking of regenerative ag, healthy soils is a huge component and a key principle to it. So when thinking about healthy soil, you just think about like the cover cropping you may do, or just understanding like the makeup of your soil too and what may be needed. When thinking of like small farming and regenerative ag too, I feel like observation is so key when starting your farm, and really just like kind of literally getting into the dirt and understanding what your soil looks like. And I'm not sure if many of you have joined us for our previous presentations, but like thinking about weeds and some of the other things we had talked about, like that's just really important when it comes to like thinking about healthy soil and like understanding what your soil may need. So I think as we move on into the presentation, um, everything will kind of just come together and like when speaking of regenerative ag. But Chelsea, did you have anything to add as far as healthy soils?
Yeah, so I think again, going back to some of our indigenous practices, and I think um what they teach us, when I first learned how to farm, they taught us the method of the three sisters. So the corn, beans, and squash, and thinking about how they all play a role in the health of the soil. And that's why we plant them together in a certain way. And so I think when it comes to healthy soil, there's a lot of stories and practices and lessons to be learned when it comes to the type of crop that you're planting, and the type of seed that you have also, or the type of seed that you're planting. And so the way I learned it was that, the squash provide a lot of shade because they have really big leaves. And then the beans, they provide a lot of nitrogen to the soil, and the squash is like covering a lot of the beans. So there's like kind of like a forest happening. And then, of course, you plant the corn, which actually corn does a lot to the soil. It in that year, like it'll actually deplete the soil. And so when you're planting beans and squash with the corn, you're actually helping that soil, because corn sometimes can be a little bit depleting of the soil. And so, but corn is such a staple, right, for our communities, and it's like it is the seed that generates our communities. And so I think over time, like that is why our practices in farming and planting seeds incorporated planting beans and squash. And so like around our corn. So yeah, when I think of healthy soil, I think of like just this intention and this prayer, and this really well thought out way of planting certain seeds in order to generate healthy soil of that season. And then I also think too, like in our communities, or where I'm from, I plant, or I'm from Acoma Pueblo, and we're really big on like saving water. We don't have a lot of water out there. And also I think a big part of that is having healthy soil, because when you have healthy soil, you don't need as much water as other places that may not have healthy soil. And so what I've learned too is also, like we have different plots or different fields, and we let some of those fields rest one year, and then we come back to them and we do a lot of work or maintenance of the soil, those fields that are resting. So it's kind of this rotation of work amongst different families. And we used to actually, when we used to farm communally, we used to like talk to each other a lot about, what is one family's field growing, and just kind of keep tabs in the community of like what we're growing, so that we're not, so that like, how do I explain it? Like we all have the crop that we need for that season, but we're not depleting all of our fields all at once. And so to me, healthy soil is kind of like thinking about that, like thinking about the ways that we used to intentionally grow, and we used to be in community and growing, so that we're not constantly putting this pressure on all of our fields to generate food for us. So that's what I'll add.
Well said, Chelsea. Thank you so much. And going back to like the Chelsea talking about the three sisters and intercropping, and also just like observing anything within your farm, it's really good just to see how plants like interact with each other. Like Chelsea was saying, a lot of like the corn, it is a heavy feeder. It takes a lot from our soils, so it depletes the soils a lot. So bringing in the squash and the beans is really helpful in kind of giving back to the soil too. And I would say, it's kind of hard to say where to begin to start when you're like just starting out farming. But I would say creating healthy soils or building healthy soils is a really good foundation for any farm. Because the healthier the soil you have, the more nutritious and the healthier plants that you will have too. And then, of course, it also contributes to like better water quality as well. Um, and just like less invasive like species as far as weeds or anything else. And then also I think one thing to consider is how do we know that we've like achieved a good healthy soil? It's really dependent too on where you're at, and just understand too that like you're not gonna have like, if you find yourself in a plot where you really need to work on the soil, just understand to give yourself like time and grace when it comes to that, because it does take a lot of work. And like with Chelsea saying, like we do leave some plots like alone for a while to rest. Like that's a good thing too. A lot of things just take time, and it's just good to never really rush things and just to let things happen organically as they do. And that's just like part of the main principles of regenerative agriculture. Um, so yeah, next slide. So another big component of regenerative ag is biodiversity. And this is just promoting different diversity in plants, insects, and maybe some animals that will help make your farm a little more resilient and have like a more stable ecosystem. So when thinking of like biodiversity on the farm, it's really good to consider like what beneficial insects you would like to bring in and what attracts those, what like different plants they might like, or also thinking about where you may put those things. Um, and yeah, I feel it's so important because it helps with like your crop yield as well. Like having all of these different types of insects or like plants in your garden really do like considerably help a lot with like the yield that you'll bring in because there's different types of pollinators out there. I think a lot of us focus primarily on bees, but we have to think of like even though they may sometimes destroy our crops and like lay their little eggs in there, but some species of butterflies or moths are helpful, even like some birds like hummingbirds, um yeah, other things like that to consider. Anything you'd like to add, Chelsea or Daisy?
Yeah, I'll just add that when thinking about biodiversity, you'll see like another key part of building healthy soils, biodiversity is observation, as mentioned before. So observing what likes to grow in your gardens or in your fields or on your farm. You'll see when you start growing year after year, you'll see a bunch of different weeds, a bunch of different medicinal weeds, medicinal plants that will grow. I think here in the Southwest, we're very fortunate to have a lot of plant medicine that just grows around us and grows in water. So when some plants are getting a lot of water because you're feeding them water, they like to grow. And you'll find that a lot of those medicinal plants will pop up, especially around like in the around the edges of your garden or on the edges of your field or of your farm. And I think those add a lot to the biodiversity. And so I think it's important, like as you're starting or as you're in your farming years, to really take note of what's growing, like really write it down in a notebook and write like where it is growing, how much of it is growing, because a lot of those plants add so much biodiversity. A lot of those medicinal plants and herbs and flowers, they grow in the form of a flower, and so they attract a lot of the pollinators for your field. And then I would also add that I've learned a lot about biodiversity when it comes to the seed amaranth. And so amaranth was traditionally a crop that the Pueblo people used to plant as sort of their fourth sister. So the amaranth and the sunflower, the big, mammoth sunflower, we used to plant those because they used to grow organically or naturally along the borders of our fields. And so when that seed, the amaranth seed, was wiped out by Spanish colonization, we started to find that the organic or the natural version of amaranth was like growing really strongly around our fields. And so then we started to plant the cultivated seed of the amaranth. And so yeah, I would say like when it comes to thinking about biodiversity, really think about the seeds that are either traditional or heirloom or that are open pollinated or that are like really close to your home and that you may not necessarily think about or that you might not necessarily get from, seed exchanges or from other farmers, but that grow to really feed the biodiversity and also the protection of your gardens and your fields. And so, and those plants, it's really amazing that our lands do this for us, but they're being grown there for a reason. They put themselves for a reason. And so sometimes you might not even need to buy or get, seeds that add to your biodiversity. There might just be growing there already. And so thinking about how you nourish them also. And yeah, that's it.
Hey, thank you so much. Yes, biodiversity helps so much, and it helps really regulate our nutrient and water cycles too. Um, it just does so much. And like I like to think of it in like the context of the world. Like we need all sorts of, people to make a world and a great environment. And it's like that in our gardens too, or in our fields or in our backyards. Biodiversity is so important. All right, next slide. And of course, with healthy soils and biodiversity, you just have improved water quality overall. So a lot of like having either like a cover crop or healthy soils in general, and like we were talking about like biodiversity, having like a wide range of um hopefully more like native grasses and plants and whatnot. They all just sort of work together to help create just a healthier system for us. And like with that comes an improved water quality. And of course, like who can be against like better water? And feel free to jump in anytime, Chelsea, too, if you have anything to add. It's kind of hard for me to really explain like so much more on like these different components of regenerative ag because I'm like everything just makes so much sense, like once you understand how soil and plants and like animals and insects and water all work together, you just have a really great, healthy environment.
Yeah, yeah, it improves water quality for me. It's interesting to again think about. I feel like some of these topics, like I've had to almost think about in a way, how do I explain it? Like go backwards, like re-indigenize them because I'm like, this is sometimes like not the reality. Like the reality is when it comes to my experience with water, again, like I've done a lot of farming in Acoma where I'm from, or that's where I farm. And a lot of our water that we use is contaminated actually, due to, the various, the uranium mines that are west of us. Still, some of that remnants is in our water because our water actually comes from the mountain. Um, Mount Taylor. And so when the Mount Taylor was being mined, there was still remnants in the ground, from that project. And so it's still flowing actually in our water. And so we use in the Pueblo, we use the water that comes from the ditch. And so yeah, I'm like, improve water quality. That is an aspiration because we still experience contamination. But what I would say also is that when I think of water quality, I think of all the many water saving or all of the water, yeah, all the water saving techniques that we ancestrally had. So there's a way, to that people. So when you look at different pueblos and in Acoma in particular, you'll see that all of the homes were built on the sides of small mesas. And so we all kind of like tucked ourselves on the side of the mesa because we all had fields or gardens behind our homes. And so some of the ways that they used to have water or hold water that was straight from, rainwater, was that they would do a lot of diversions off of the mesa of that water that was coming down. And so they would do a lot of damming with, they would bring the seed from some of the weeds that were growing around and they would dam up some of the water so that it wouldn't flow so fast into the garden. But they would do that and then they would pile a lot of sandstone rock into those sort of almost those terraces. And then once it got eventually down, once the rainfall got eventually down through that dam that they built naturally, then it would get to their field or to their gardens, and it wouldn't be such a flood, it wouldn't flood out. And then there's also in the larger like landscapes, like in the meadows or in the valleys of Acoma, like we used to have old fields there, and all of those fields were grown by just rainfall. There was no water irrigated, or there was no water, coming from the ditches to those fields. And so when I think of that, I think of how practical that is in our time. We're realizing that our climate is becoming more and more dry, but how much or how pure and how good that water is, because it's coming straight from the rain. And so, yeah, I think when I think about improved water quality, I think in like my community in particular, like it would take a lot, because a lot of the farmers do use the ditch still. It would take a lot of a whole revamping of the ways that we farm and the ways that we plant, and like going back to some of those traditional ways of holding water. And so, yeah, I'm not really sure if I'm like the best person to ask about improved water quality, because
No,
that's just the reality of what we're experiencing in our communities that are, yeah, and that's one of our concerns when it comes to climate change. So
yeah. No, thank you so much for sharing that, because that is a real issue for like a lot of people, whether it be like in our Pueblo communities or elsewhere. Like we often have to think of things that are completely out of our control, like mining or like dumping or something. But yeah, like when we're thinking of regenerative ag, like of course, like that's one of the first like slides we had up was soil health. I'm sorry, excuse me. But once you have like you are working on your soils and you're planting things that are more native to your area, and like I think it's really good too to research like all types of different other plants besides like produce, like different grasses or flowers that may help with like improving your soil, improving that filtration, because then that's what helps like kind of I think in the long term help like make those of course like I'm saying those soils healthier, but I mean like it helps with like cleaning your water and all of that as well. And our plants and other things just do so much more than I think we will ever really know. But yeah, as long as you and like going back of like having healthy soil be like a foundation to wherever you may be growing or planting or something like that, like yeah, having that main component first of a healthy soil will like eventually lead to all of this, to a more biodiverse land and more like healthier waters coming through, or like your garden creating that too. And once you have healthy soils too, like if you're growing in an area where like the water availability is becoming less and less, like your soil will work with you to be able to retain much more moisture to be able to help you grow all your plants. So, yeah, next slide.
I'll go to the next slide in just a second. I just had something I wanted to share, Tiana and Chasity, which I think one of the things I think about with improved water quality is that in traditional farming, folks were not and are not using like heavy chemicals, like heavy chemical fertilizers and pesticides. That was really like introduced with conventional agriculture. And so what we've seen when people are applying a lot of chemical fertilizers or these poisons, these pesticides to deal with pests, that's never isolated. So even if you're just doing that in your own yard or on your own farm, all of those chemicals are entering the water system for all of us. And so that was just like one more thing I wanted to add, is like one of the benefits of caring for our soils and not using chemicals is that we're protecting our waters too. And so that's just something I want to introduce to people. If maybe you have been using those methods, just consider that those chemicals, they don't just disappear. They go into our water, and there's other strategies that we can employ that will keep our water safe for all of our neighbors downstream too. So
Thank you so much for adding that.
Yeah.
And the best thing of all, when you're practicing regenerative ag and you have great healthy soils, you've created biodiversity, which in turn is improving your water quality, you tend to have higher crop yields. When everything is working together like so well, then you can see like you can see it in the fruit. um Another thing I'll add to that, yeah, like I don't know, like it's just like, yeah, thinking about regenerative ag or just like in implementing these practices, or for a lot of us, just kind of doing what our ancestors have done. Like the proof is there. It just shows like when you take the time to really care about the land that you're on and you really observe like what it needs and like, what's there to help you as far as like, the diversity in the plants and the insects and animals that we have, like how it really contributes to an overall just healthier food system and like yeah, uh higher crop yields, but also beyond that, knowing that your produce is healthy and nutritious too, because it is taking, it's like the soil is feeding it, the water is feeding it. And when you have healthy soils, when you have healthy water, you have healthier and more nutritious food, which is of course great for everybody. And I don't know if you, Daisy or Chastity, had anything to add to that, but I feel like for this, like higher crop yields, it's just like so straight to the point. Like if you practice regenerative ag principles, like you'll see your results there.
Yeah, I'll just add to with higher crop yields. I mean, yeah, it's kind of straightforward. Like when you do all of these regenerative practices, you'll see it in the crop, you'll get a lot of abundance. But I'm also like really excited about like water harvesting techniques and like the best practices of um, growing and farming in like very localized or very unique to where you are. So like I've seen a lot of success when people again are very intentional with the ways that they treat the land, ways that they understand, that sometimes we are in scarcity when it comes to water in the Southwest. And when you sort of think about yourself as someone who is planting or using the land, like you start to think about ways that you yourself as a farmer, as a gardener, can be a positive influence or be somebody that can help generate health and life back to the land and to the water. And when I think of higher crop yields, I've noticed that over the years of farming, the years where I've been very intentional and put a lot of love into the land and into the water and into the seeds, like because farming is not just planting seeds so that you can get food or yield a crop. It's a lot around thinking about, how am I going to plant a certain seed and then it's going to share its gifts with us as food, but also, how am I thinking about saving those seeds afterwards? How am I thinking about the next year, where am I going to get my seeds from? The next year, how am I going to observe the land and the water so that I know that, when I plant when I plant certain crop next year, like the water is going to go that way and it's going to feed my garden in abundance. And so it's kind of like when you're thinking about, the future of your farm, or the future of your family and the ways that you're feeding them, it's really switches your mind into becoming a steward of that place and of that land. And I think that that's what the crop and with the food and everything, that's what they listen to. And they almost like gift you with an abundance if you're having that type of intentionality. And yeah, so when I think of like why all of these things work together, if it may not be making sense, it like to me that's how it makes sense, you know? Like it's interesting when we learn or when the ways that I learned about farming, it was a lot about, you know, it wasn't actually so that we could so that I could generate food for myself or for my family. It was a lot about just being a steward to the land and being a steward to the water. And so yeah, I just want to add that on how like these all of these gifts of the crop and the food and the vegetables, they all just sort of bless us for being those stewards. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Thank you, Chelsea, and thank you so much too for like bringing up seeds. And yeah, when you are, farming and out there, I think it's so important to save the seeds that you have or as much as you can from where you're growing, especially if they are in pretty like harsh conditions, because the seeds learn and they carry like that little memory with them. And understanding that is definitely a key to like having a successful farming future. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think we can go to the next slide. So yes, the one thing that's we as farmers see firsthand, I feel, is just like climate change and how it really affects like not only our crops and our land, but also us. Sorry, excuse me here. I'm gonna just drink some water. Oh, excuse me, sorry. Spring season, just how it is. But yeah, sorry, let's get back to it. So, when you're practicing a lot of these regenerative agriculture principles, like really working on your soil, introducing biodiversity, which in turn helps your water and also helps your crop, a lot of this, like creating a really good ecosystem, really does help mitigate the climate change that we are seeing. So with like healthier soils, like we are able to retain a lot more moisture in our soils, which in turn help our plants and like really all of the other plants around us. And I feel like having a really biodiverse area, either where you live or where you farm, you will see like the difference in climate as opposed to like a field that kind of maybe has like nothing or an area that is really struggling. Like you can see the actual difference. Um, yeah, anything you guys like to add as far as that?
Yeah, I'll add that. Yeah, I think I've talked a lot about ways that, like all of the ways I feel like we grow in Acoma, like all the water harvesting techniques, all the intention of the seeds. And I, those are all ways that like we're thinking about the future and how much drier that we are gonna see come. And I just want to add also, like I always add to the conversation around climate change, is that um our people, our ancestors and those have been growing before us, they were very smart, they were very intentional and intelligent in ways that they planted seed, in the ways that they saved seed, in ways that they cultivated seed for health, for and I would say that it is a lot, it's was a lot told in our history that there were moments where we did face major drought. Like it was not this linear ways that we've learned about climate change, that that our climate is getting hotter and hotter and hotter, though it is that way right now. But when we think about our time or a time before us, before we were even here, that our ancestors also experienced really extreme droughts, and because they experienced that, they would come up with different ways of cultivating seed or gathering seed or storing some of their seed or storing some of their food. And so you look at the ways in my community in particular, they would dig underground almost fridges. So they would store all of their food when they would see, when they would anticipate major drought coming, because that would save food for them for the year. And so a lot of those underground fridges would exist or they still exist in some families. And so, and then we also would store, we live, our ancestral land is close to the El Malpais, so like the cave areas. So there's those big ice caves near us, and that is all made from volcanic activity, but they would also store a lot of their medicine, a lot of their food, a lot of their seed into some of those places that are, that sort of the climate couldn't touch. And so, yeah, I would say like when it comes to climate change, and we talk about climate change and the fear of climate change, as farmers, I always like to add about, the ways in which we experience drought as a in our lineages, in our communities. And when I feel like when you start to also think of that, you start to think about ways that you want to prepare and also farm and plant seeds in the present in a way where you're sort of uncovering or remembering the ways that our ancestors did it and those struggles that they had. And I feel like when you start to think about, the past and the present and the future, you're really setting yourself up for success, and you're setting yourself up to have this more in-depth understanding of what it means and the importance of who you are as a grower in this moment. And so, yeah, I always like to add that. I always like to add that piece.
Thank you. Well said. Yeah, like I feel like I agree with you, like where our ancestors have recognized like climate change happening where we did have these droughts and whatnot. Because when I began my farming journey in Taos, I heard from a lot of my elders that we would have like 7 years worth of food stored in the event of like, major event, like a major drought or something going on, you know. So yeah, really good things to think about. But yeah, as you begin to just really like keep regenerative ag in your mind and follow these principles, like you are more resilient to a lot of the changes that are happening to you, or even just sudden things that may happen, like maybe a flood or like a drought or anything going on. Just know that by implementing these practices, um, yeah, you'll have a far greater survival rate and just, yeah, continue contributing to that resilience. So thanks. Next slide. And right now, we have any questions you guys have? We can do our best to answer them. And feel free to, if like nothing pops up right now, you can reach out to like any one of us. Our emails will be at the end of the presentation, or I'm not sure if I believe there's an ability to interact with some of our socials, Daisy, if people have questions or want to learn more. But I'm more than open to answer anything at any time you guys have.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Tiana was saying. Probably reaching out to any of us is the easiest. But there is an Instagram and we are responsive to that too. And also, if you just don't like to come on camera or share your voice, feel free to leave a message in the chat. That's also totally great.
Thank you. Think we can move on if there's no questions. I just want to be mindful of our time too. So
Yeah.
11:50 is about 10 minutes.
I was gonna say we'll probably fly through this last section about soil health, like how to care for soil, and I bet questions will come up. So if we run out of time, people can reach out to us after.
Cool. All right. So soil health principles. Yeah, just things to consider when you're building your healthy soils. It's always good to just, keep soils covered as much as possible. And you want to, choose more beneficial cover crops as far as that. But then sometimes, like we may be like in a financial crunch or in a budget. And sometimes we have to make do with what may be keeping our soil covered, and that sometimes is weeds that we're not particularly fond of. Um, but it is helpful. It does like keep from erosion happening. Um, and like it helps with like the water filtration at times. But if you are really working on creating healthy soils wherever you are growing, know that keeping soils covered is really, really a good thing to consider. And two, like going back to like a main thing when you are farming is just observation. Observation is so key. Just like keep looking at like how your soils are and like what you implement over time and how it reacts to that. And just like what you do, and it's like farming, as I think we all know, is just a constant like learning. You're forever a student when it comes to the land. But another part of, or some of our healthy soil principles, of course, is minimizing soil disturbance. We want to make sure that all of the good biodiverse little bugs in our soil are maintaining their little house. When I think of like minimizing soil disturbance, like I automatically think of tilling. And when I first began learning about healthy soils, um, someone put it like really cute, like think of all of like these great beneficial like worms and other like microbes in your soil that have built like a great community and little houses and whatnot, and they're really contributing to your healthy soil overall. And when you come in, really like disturbing that soil, like constantly tilling, you're constantly like destroying that little community that is contributing to your soil health. Um, Another thing, of course, is maximizing biodiversity. When you have, a whole range of like, plants or produce on your field, you're inviting in a lot of like different um, insects or other things that could be beneficial to your soil health, which in turn creates, a healthy environment. And another thing I feel like is so important is maintaining a living root. And one way to do that too is if you're farming and are minimizing your soil disturbance by using like a broad fork or something. But you're clearing out your fields. Like what I like to do is just snip off like the top of the plant and leave the root in there and maybe like an inch of the plant above, and then just keeping that in your soils like to overwinter, or if you're leaving that on like a land that you're letting rest to, because all of those little microbes and those little worms love to eat that. And we know when we get good worm poop, then we have great soils too. um and another thing too, for those of us that may have animals on our land, I know some people don't, because that's a whole other thing. I feel like as far as farm food safety, it's good just to integrate them in too. And what I like to do in Taos, because we have a very short growing season, but it may be completely different for wherever everyone else may be. I like to bring in some animals, primarily goats or chickens, into my field at the end and have them like eat up whatever, may be there, hopefully not eating any of my roots. But then they come and like, lightly disturb the soil. They leave their poop there, which in turn helps as well. But when you are doing that, just be very mindful of what you are going to be growing in the following year. And so if you do integrate animals and they happen to poop all over that area, I like to think of the 90 to 120 day rule. And that's just like giving that amount of time in between like harvesting something from there, because then the sun does its job of really breaking down, that manure and whatnot, to where you're not contaminating the produce that you plant. So yeah, just really keep all of these in mind when you're thinking about creating your healthy soils. And just like talk to other farmers, especially in the area that you may be in, because they may have some tips and tricks that will be helpful for you. But also just research, yeah, like what like native plants to introduce or anything else like that. Yeah, I feel like just talking to other people is really helpful when it comes to, begin creating healthy soils on your land. And feel free to jump in at any time, Chelsea or Daisy. I feel like I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, just thinking about the amount of time that we have left.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I'll just share a little bit of add a little bit of like shed light on, when you're growing. I've actually grown in like both environments, like out in Acoma, where it's like really dry and we kind of like use what we got. And then I've also grown in Jemez Pueblo, where my partner is from, and there, it's just a different climate. There's a little bit more water, and I've seen just the difference. I'm like, I feel like when I was growing in Acoma, I was like, whoa, like this is very different. And so there's a lot to be said about it. Depends also on where you are, and the type of practices and principles that you should incorporate. So when I think about keeping soil covered, I think about, the ways in Acoma, what we used to do or what we do is that we use a lot of the surrounding bushes or the stalks that are already grown in that field. We wait for them to dry. And then we bring our horses into the field and we have them like chop down all of the stalks. And so that it's kind of covering, like it's like a little blanket for the soil. And so I've seen that when I've done that, that has helped the next season when I come back to my farm or my field, like I'll see that really bring a lot of moisture into the soil, and like the soil is just happy. And then the years that I have not done that, when I was being lazy, yeah, it really, like you would just see all of like how much the dirt and the soil circulated, because like also back in Acoma we have really large winds, and so the wind will do a number to your field if you're not doing a lot of maintenance or if you're not being intentional with covering it. And then I've also realized too that the fields that I was explaining earlier, that we leave alone and we let them rest, you'll see that, a year later or 2 years later, that soil is like really happy, because it had growth in it at one point, and then it was given time to rest and regenerate itself. And then I also want to add to, I had mentioned about some of the plants that grow in our fields naturally. The A lot of times they're considered weeds, but some of them, a lot of them are actually medicinal. And so thinking about ways that you can be stewarding those plants that are growing, and also like as Tiana was mentioning, like getting some of those weeds out. But I think it's also like thinking about ways that they play a role in this biodiversity that, yeah, that is already there. And so yeah, when I think of regenerative agriculture, and when I think about the ways that we've been farming for a really long time, I think it's sort of a balance between like um, doing what we can in order to protect and build healthy soils, but also incorporating and being mindful of what is there for us. And so I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah, I think both of those practices kind of, they work together, they work in tandem with each other. Um, yeah, I don't know about making sense, but I've just kind of I've seen the success of both.
Yeah, no, you definitely are making sense. And I really enjoy your perspectives on things. And I think that's really important too when it comes to regenerative ag, is just to hear all the different perspectives and like people's stories when it comes to that. Um, but yeah, and just still being mindful of time. And I'm sorry, like we didn't really get into like how to really implement these soil health principles. But if that's like an interest for you all, maybe that's something, and Daisy, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe something we can put together later. Because I have a lot of experience from being the executive director at Red Willow Farm, which is located on Taos Pueblo. Healthy soils was like our main component to really creating a really great farm. And so there's all kinds of different ways that you can, keep your soil covered, how you can minimize the soil disturbance, how you can maximize your biodiversity, what what to do when it comes to maintaining a living root in your soil, um and if you have animals, how to really integrate them into your land while being conscious about food safety. Because there's so much more. Like this could be a whole presentation on its own, and I would really like value bringing in Chelsea and maybe another person on our team to talk about how they practice these principles or how they implement them on their farm too. So yeah, feel free to reach out if you maybe have an immediate question or really want to flesh this out.
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say we can absolutely do a more in-depth soil health workshop, and I think we should. This today was really just to kind of start to introduce people to these ideas. So we'll be happy to put out more educational materials. I also want to say we're going to be working on some seed saving materials because I know people are interested in that. So outside of our sort of like workshop series right now, there's always room to keep doing education. And for now, I'm going to just kind of move through these next few slides. They're just going to be images that kind of support what Tiana and Chasity just shared about. Just because I think pictures can be helpful. So here we can see soil that is covered in beautiful cover crop. Minimizing soil disturbance and minimizing external inputs. I'll just add here that compost is a really awesome way to feed our soil and not needing to use like chemical fertilizers, which is why there's this beautiful compost bin image. Here's a beautiful biodiverse garden. So we can see how gorgeous it is when we move away from like monocropping where we just grow one thing. I actually think it's a lot more beautiful to see diversity. Maintaining a living root and what that looks like under the soil. And yeah, some animals that we can integrate into our land management. So I'll pass it off to Tiana and Chasity and our participants for our last Q&A session.
Ooh. Well, if there's not any questions right now, if you are like just starting your biodiverse journey or you're like your regenerative ag journey, yeah, talk to people, read a lot of like books or things that like kind of talk about that, like intercropping, anything else. Like really read like or do research around like your region and like the native plants and like the native insects and whatnot that could be really beneficial to you. But I would also recommend a book called Stop Talking, and it's about Alaskan native teachings. I think around mostly like hunting and foraging, but it's really just like, sitting still and like really not talking when it comes to like being on your land and just like observing and listening, looking. Because I feel like having that connection with your land will definitely just like make a lot of these regenerative ag principles and everything we've talked about just make more sense. Yeah, I think just understanding your land and your water and like the environment around you is key to growing. And I
I
believe
just
there's a free PDF version online. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I just wanted to echo off something that you just shared, Tiana, that I've actually heard throughout this conversation too. And I think that it can be easy to just focus on how this is healing for the land and healing for the environment. And we're talking about soil and water and mitigating climate change. But I think the beauty of these practices is it's also deeply healing to us as people when we're coming into deep relationship with the land around us. And I feel like I've heard that suggested or said explicitly a lot in the sharing today, but I just wanted to like kind of highlight that this slowing down and being in deep observation and relationship is an opportunity for us to do a lot of healing too.
Absolutely. Farming and like, yeah, that is just so healing within itself. And honestly, like that's what really got me into my farming career is I was just like not doing well as a person. And I found peace when I was like out gardening or pulling weeds, and just so many things made sense to me when thinking about my life and where I was at and how I wanted to improve myself. And it really helped me connect too with like my culture and my people and why we do the things that we do. And yeah, just really like instilled that reverence for the land in me. And it's, yeah, I would say I completely turned my life around because of farming. Well, if there are no questions right now, I think we could move on to our contact info. Oh, and also our upcoming workshop. So we have one next week, same time, 11 o'clock. And what was the theme of that workshop, Daisy?
Yeah, so this was our coworker Michael's idea, which was just to have a workshop to just do a live question and answer. So there won't really be as much of a presentation, so much as an opportunity to come to our team with questions. So I'm really excited about this opportunity for everyone. It's going to be on Zoom for people who are around the state. But if you're in Albuquerque, there's also going to be people in person at Casa Barelas. So if you prefer to be in person, that opportunity will exist for you. And yeah, and so definitely if questions came up today or they didn't come up today, but they come up tonight in your dreams or tomorrow when you wake up, that will be a space to ask them.
I'm so excited about that day. That'll be
Yeah,
really
me
cool.
too.
Yeah,
And
here's our information. Oh, go ahead.
I just realized that we hadn't added Chastity's information to this yet, so I'll leave it up to her if she wants to include her email or her phone in the chat for you all. Otherwise, most of our staff is on here. And if you have a question for one of us that we feel like somebody else might be able to answer better, we really work as a team. And so maybe you'll ask me a question and I'll say, hey, I actually think Tiana has the answer to this, and could connect you to her, or vice versa.
Cool. Thank you, Daisy. Thanks for facilitating this. I know Chastity and I are just like learning more about how to run these presentations. So I really appreciate you being here. And I really appreciate all of our participants too. And yeah, take the opportunity for next week if you have any questions to come and join us.
Awesome.
Thank you
And
so much.
yeah, thank you, everybody. I'm also learning tech, so I'm grateful for all of our patience with each other in this digital world. I did see that Chastity put her information in the chat, so thank you for doing that, Chastity. Yeah, and I recognize there's time for us to move on with our days, but I'll invite, if anyone wants to come off camera and just like wave or say goodbye, it's nice to close that way.